Hello and welcome, everyone. I'm David Carter, Head of Litigation and Regulatory Policy here at Postscript. I'm very excited for you to be joining us today for this conversation. Today actually marks the first webinar that has been organized and sponsored by Postscript Pride, the employee resource group here within Postscript. We wanted to bring together a conversation about how e-commerce brands can be effective allies and advocates for the LGBT community, particularly as we look towards the kickoff of Pride Month here in just a few days. Today, we will discuss how to make allyship a foundation of your brand. We are also going to explore some emerging issues, such as the use of AI in marketing, but examine those issues through the unique lens of how they impact uniquely the LGBTQ community. Before we dive in, a few housekeeping items. First, this session is going to be recorded, and we'll circulate a link to you for those that have registered. Second, we're going to throw up here a couple of polls and poll questions if you could take an opportunity to weigh in while I make introductions to our speakers. So we have two incredible speakers joining me today, and I'm very excited to introduce you to them. First, we have Jenn Grace, author of Beyond the Rainbow, Personal Stories and Practical Strategies to help your business and workplace connect with the LGBTQ market. In addition to being an award-winning author, Jenn is founder and CEO of Publish Your Purpose, the acclaimed publisher of nonfiction books. She has published 175 books written by thought leaders, visionaries, and entrepreneurs who are striving to make a difference in our world. I'm very much looking forward to Jenn sharing some of those practical strategies with us today. And luckily, you will also have an opportunity to receive a free digital copy of Jenn's book. We'll provide that information to you later in the webinar. I'm excited to also be joined by my friend Carlos Gutierrez, who is Deputy Director and General Counsel for the LGBT Technology Partnership and Institute, or LGBT Tech, which works to improve access, increase inclusion, ensure safety, and empower entrepreneurship for LGBTQ communities around technology. I've had the pleasure of knowing Carlos for many years. Both of us actually have a long history in communications law, maybe longer than we really want to talk about today. But before taking on his current role, Carlos worked at Discovery Communications, where he served as VP of Business Operations and Strategy, as well as Head of Business and Legal Affairs for the world's first 24-hour-a-day 3D network called 3Net. He also spent time previously working at the Federal Communications Commission and in the White House. So my first question for you both is, let's dive directly into the e-commerce area. And I'm going to make this a pretty broad question. Whether a brand is LGBTQ owned, wants to support the LGBTQ community, or wants to reach an LGBTQ audience, it can be difficult to engage in ways that feel both authentic to the brand, but also meeting the demands and priorities of investors and other stakeholders within the business. So let me start with that broad question. What advice do you have for direct-to-consumer audiences that are listening today, and how to approach this issue, how to think about preparation, not just for Pride Month, but really throughout the year of engaging an LGBTQ audience? Carlos, I'm going to start with you on this one.
Great, thank you. And first of all, thank you, David and Postscript, for hosting this event. I'm really excited to talk about this issue near and dear to my heart. So I'm going to start with a thing that I really recommend to everyone that I work with, and it's just thinking about inclusive design principles generally. All of the conversations around inclusive design can apply both to kind of the regular online websites that you have, as well as marketing campaigns that you do. And what is exactly inclusive design, and why is it important for our community? Well, at its simplest, inclusive design is an approach focused on creating accessible and beneficial products and environments for a diverse range of users, regardless of age, abilities, gender, race, or sexual orientation, or gender identity. It involves integrating inclusive design principles and features into interfaces, content, and functionalities. And I think there's research that kind of backs up the idea that inclusive design is actually something that companies can do to become more profitable. For example, there was a study that was conducted by Accenture that revealed that companies that prioritize inclusive design make 1.6 times more revenue, 2.6 times more net revenue, and overall twice as much profit as their competitors. There's also another survey that I'm looking at it from the consumer side that talks about the fact that 59% of consumers say that they will buy more from brands that launch campaigns that are focused on diverse communities, such as the LGBTQ community. So why is this important for LGBTQ people generally? I think because inclusive design, while emerging from a tradition that was focused primarily upon removing barriers to physical access in the disability space, it also became a concept that includes the development of tools that crosses cultural divides as well. LGBTQ plus communities are a distinct cultural group that are often divided from or marginalized by broader society. This precarious position makes us a group that is particularly well served by inclusive design practices. So inclusive design for LGBTQ plus communities is about empowering users to engage fully with digital spaces and interactions, as these practices benefit everyone, not just the group that is being addressed. And I think a great example of how a inclusive design tool can be used for a specific community, but end up benefiting society at large is the digital curb effect. And this is probably the most famous inclusive design example that's out there. In the 1960s, sidewalk curb cuts were first introduced with wheelchair users in mind. However, they now benefit not only people with mobility challenges, but also parents with strollers, travelers with luggage, cyclists, and more. The digital curb code effect brings us into the digital space, and it gives greater digital accessibility in online spaces. So, for example, features like alt text for images, they're not only good for visually impaired users, but they also help improve SEO, search engine optimization. They provide context for all users, including those who have slow internet connections or that are using text-only browsers. Customizable font sizes benefit people who are reading on small screens or bright sunlight. So the digital cover effect highlights how inclusive design practices initially developed for specific needs can enhance the overall experience for everyone. So within the LGBTQ plus community, some of the inclusive design tools would be, showing a range of diverse people and diverse sexual orientations without stereotyping. And again, while this is really important to our community, that is something that every company can benefit from generally to make sure that they're presenting a product that is not being skewed. So designers and platforms that are looking to design inclusively should start by looking for inclusive design toolkits. There are a wealth of toolkits out there that will help companies or individuals recognize inclusion, put processes in place that are inclusive in nature, and ensure that those processes are assessing and repeating that cycle. So there's a lot of tools out there, and it's an important feature for anyone working with the LGBTQ plus community.
Excellent. Thank you, Carlos. You touched on something that we'll probably come back to later, which is inclusivity without stereotyping. And I think that's something that I'm pretty sure we'll touch on in some later comments as well. But Jenn, why don't you jump in here as well?
Yeah. So first, thank you for having me. I'm excited for this conversation. So what I really love is that Carlos just kind of really outlined the lay of the land of how to do this well digitally. But what I want to share is just kind of a personal story, hence the title of my book, Personal Stories and Practical Strategies, that I had working with a company who did the digital side really well, but did not do the rest of it well. So if I go back in time to 2006 is when I started working on LGBTQ marketing campaigns. And I was working for an insurance company at the time, and it was a pretty homophobic environment to start with. So it wasn't an inclusive environment. There was undertones of racism, just overt homophobia. And I was tapped by the CEO to come up with an LGBTQ marketing campaign that would attract more customers to our insurance company. And I was like, this is amazing. And I loved what I did. I was responsible for all of our marketing, and I loved what I did. And I was like, this is great. It's something that I'm personally passionate about. I'm part of the community. This will be fun. And I got the green light from my direct manager, from the CEO, to go out and join different organizations. So like the National Gay and Lesbian Chamber of Commerce was one of the first ones that I joined, the International Gay and Lesbian Travel Association. And so I was able to kind of go out and network and mingle. And I created all these beautiful marketing assets that had, like custom photo shoots. We had a custom microsite for attracting LGBTQ clients. And I would go out and I would be telling everybody, like, you have to do business with us. We are really in it. Look at this website, look at these marketing materials. Everything looks great. The messaging was well done. And I would come back from having been out on a trip where I was, even though I was marketing, I was very much doing the selling. And I would come back into the office, and more times than not, I would overhear someone making some type of snide remark about me behind my back. And so one time I remember someone very clearly calling me a dyke, just out of reach. Or, why are they sending this dyke out there to go market to these people that we don't want as customers? So the point being is that our actual employee base wanted nothing to do with this marketing, nothing to do with it. I was the one person who was carrying kind of the torch. And again, it was the CEO who gave me the full blessing. And it was, a collaborated idea by both of us. And the reality was that I've got to a place where I could not reconcile going out and saying, like, hey, we are so great for the community. Look at all these great things that we're doing. And then coming in and being like directly discriminated against in the workplace by myself, like kind of like an island alone. So I share that because when we think about doing this, it is really easy to do the digital side. The digital side is the easy side, in my opinion, especially when you have very clear guidelines like Carlos was sharing, right? Like very clear, like do this, do this, do this, do this. And if you're doing it with authenticity, you're going to be in good shape. If you do not have the buy-in of employees, if you do not have the buy-in of your customers, you are going to be wasting a lot of money and likely alienating a lot of people in the process. So I always try to encourage companies to really critically think if this is the right path for them, because sometimes the answer is yes and sometimes the answer is no. So if you don't think that you can really get that internal buy-in across the board, then it might be something that you say, you know what, I love this idea, but let me put a pause on this and I'll come back to it in a year or two when I think I have a better chance of getting more buy-in.
Excellent. Thanks for those really insightful initial thoughts. Let me ask you to take this lesson and some of the things that we've already talked about and apply it in a more particularized context. And that's for the audience that are focused on communicating with customers through the power of SMS marketing. As you know, our mission here at Postscript is to help our brands make SMS the #1 revenue channel. So for those that may be thinking about engaging their LGBTQ customers for the first time through SMS, do you have any specific thoughts or suggestions of things they need to be thinking about, particularly in the week or so we have before Pride Month kicks off? Carlos, do you want to jump in on this one?
Sure. Yeah, I think there's a few things that are kind of easy fixes or easy things to think about, especially because we don't have a lot of time before Pride. But generally, inclusive messaging, all year round, but specifically around Pride is very important. Brands can ensure that their SMS advertising campaigns use language and imagery that represents and respects the diversity of the LGBTQ plus community, and avoiding stereotypes and embracing authentic representation is really important to us. I think everyone kind of is aware of the fact that there is a kind of a BS meter that the LGBTQ plus community has, and we're very sensitive to kind of like the pride flags in June and then nothing for the rest of the year. So kind of consistent engagement and authentic engagement is really important. Targeted campaigns to our community, show that you are thinking about our community as well. So utilizing data segmentation that creates targeted SMS campaigns that are tailored to LGBTQ plus customers and recognize their unique interests, needs, and preferences are something that can be done quite easily. One of the big things that I hear a lot is that people are very invested in making sure that the companies that they support us. So supporting LGBTQ plus spouses and being engaged with the community on a kind of a level, charity level, is something that's really important, and showcasing support for our causes and initiatives in the advertising and demonstrating genuine allyship and commitment to the community beyond marketing efforts is something that will be very well regarded by people in the community. So collaborating with LGBTQ plus influencers, I know that there's going to be conversations around that later on and how that works, but that's certainly something that's important to our community as well. And then feedback and engagement. Encourage feedback from LGBTQ plus consumers regarding their campaigns. Listen to their input. If you're getting feedback that is kind of not, dissonant from what your goal is, really pay attention to that, because I can promise you that if you're getting 1 or 2 complaints, there's 10 times that many people who notice whatever it is and are probably also bothered by it. So the feedback loop is really important, making sure that you're listening to the community as, kind of an evolving campaign, so that you're responding to the needs and that you're not now, succumbing to any blind spots you may have in the campaigns.
Great. Jenn, do you have thoughts particularly around the SMS marketing?
Yeah, one of the things that I talk a lot about is when we're thinking about, does marketing to the LGBTQ community make sense for me, for my company, et cetera? We want to always be thinking about, Carlos's point of, if you get 2 complaints, there's going to be 10 people who really enjoyed what you were doing. It's always going to be the person who's complaining that's going to be the one that gets our attention, right? And so one of the things I usually advise is that we really want to just double down on who we are as a company, what we represent as a company, and do our best to kind of just alienate the naysayers, because there's always going to be somebody who's not 100% happy with what we're doing. But if your company kind of already has a track record potentially of not being the most open or inclusive, it doesn't make sense to go down that path. Maybe yes, maybe no. Like maybe here's a time to pivot and rebrand and really kind of set yourself apart. Or is it going to really just upset all of your customer base? So you have to kind of, take that kind of as it comes, and really make sure that you're marketing to your specific customers that you already have. And so, we were kind of talking about what we would talk about yesterday. And one of the things that kind of popped up in my mind this morning was a missed opportunity that I think from an SMS standpoint, right? So I don't know if anyone uses Map My Ride or Map My Run or any of those types of, it's an app, and it basically, if you're a runner, it tracks your mileage. It's got all kinds of great gadgets and tools to it. And same thing if you ride. I happen to do both. And last year I happened to be out on a bike ride with my son, and it was the middle of June, and I saw that it usually is this blue kind of map that's on the screen that's showing you kind of where you're going and around the neighborhood or wherever you are. And it happened to be a rainbow last year. And I was like, oh, that's kind of fun. I'm like, that's fun. But then I was also like, why is it just that this app is suddenly rainbow? Like, where is the opportunity? Because from what I would imagine to be from an SMS standpoint or from just an app standpoint, it could have been when you open the screen, like, hey, happy Pride Month, click here to get some kind of discount on upgrading to a higher level of the app or the service. Or, I know they have my cell phone number because they already text me. So it would have been like a prime opportunity for them to have engaged their LGBTQ consumers who are already using the app, and maybe giving an opportunity to self-select to say, wow, I'm loving the fact that this is, that you're doing some kind of pride marketing, because then they could have remarketed to me this year. So I feel like that was more of a missed opportunity. I did not go down, like I tried to see if I could find some information on their website earlier today, and I couldn't really find anything. So to me, it's not to say that there's anything wrong or bad about what they did, because it looks like they are trying, but it didn't seem like there was a strategy behind it. It was just more of a, hey, everyone else is turning their logo rainbow this month, let's do it too.
So it sounds like, Jenn, partly what you're saying is that to do this well, it takes some serious consideration, thought, planning, that your best decision this year, if you're sort of just thinking about it today, may be to stop thinking about next month and start thinking about next year. And to really then think about it, is the company in a position, has it matured, is it at a place in which it's going to be genuine, authentic, and that you've taken into consideration the potential downside, upsides, and are really thoughtful and committed to this before you jump into it. Is that a fair?
That's a great summary. I think commitment, is the key word there. And as Carlos was saying before, like we in the community do have kind of a BS meter. So you kind of know immediately when a company is doing it very inauthentically. And like in the case of this app, I don't really know, because I didn't have like the meter going off of like, oh, this again. But there are other times where you see stuff and you're like, come on, like, just be committed to it. So yeah, I think that was a really great summation.
Great. Let me follow up a little bit on this concept, Carlos, about engaging the LGBTQ community using technology like SMS marketing. And I know that in your work with LGBT tech, you often are helping to educate policymakers and others about how technologies and policies can have unintended consequences for members of the LGBTQ community. Um, while at the same time that you're thinking about this engagement with the audience, are there particular risks or concerns that you might have about targeting messaging towards a particular LGBTQ community, or any other kind of issues or things that need to be on the radar screen for marketers as they're thinking about that?
Yeah, absolutely. I think, one of the biggest kind of issues that we face is that there is no federal privacy bill in this country. Most countries have a federal privacy bill. The United States has yet to pass a federal privacy bill. We're in the middle of talking about one right now. I believe actually it's in markup today. So we'll see what comes out of that. But we are trying to get a federal privacy bill that would kind of give us protection around the country. But without a federal privacy bill, the privacy of LGBTQ plus individuals is very much at risk. So when we start talking about this issue, the first place to start is that LGBTQ plus individuals can face several risks when it comes to SMS marketing, primarily related to privacy and discrimination. And when we start talking about privacy risks, SMS marketing requires the collection and use of personal data. You can't text someone, you can't send them something unless you know who they are and you have that information. For LGBTQ plus individuals, that creates a heightened privacy concern, particularly for those who are not publicly out about their sexual orientation or gender identity. And so when you're targeting someone, you have to be really careful about who you're targeting and what you're targeting them with, because they may not be out to friends and family. So inadequate data security measures that could lead to data breaches that expose sensitive personal information is something that most companies have to be worried about. And if you are tracking sexual orientation, gender identity information, that has to be treated with the highest level of security that you have in your company. It cannot be a low level kind of risk, because the risk of this getting out is a big deal. Another risk that you would look at is targeting and profiling. SMS marketing involves profiling on targeting specific demographics. Obviously, that's the purpose of it, based on the behavior and preferences. There is a risk that that data can be used to target LGBTQ plus individuals in ways that make them feel uncomfortable or exploited. Again, the authenticity of the message, kind of like if you've never engaged with a person before, and all of a sudden you're sending them this deluge of pride materials, can really put somebody off. So we go back to authenticity. And related to that, it's outing, obviously. If the marketing messages are specifically tailored on an individual's private or undisclosed LGBTQ plus status, you're risking outing an individual without their consent. This can happen if the messages are seen by others who handle their phone or linked devices. My text messages come to my Mac, they come to my phone, they come to my iPad. And I have had many instances where somebody is on a device that I use, and all of a sudden they start seeing texts pop up. So the privacy issue and kind of the interconnected world that we live in means that, just because you're sending to somebody's phone doesn't mean that's where it's staying. It could be, this message could be seen across many devices by different people. Discriminatory content is something that, and no one's done it on purpose. But again, when we talk about inclusive design, marketing content that isn't inclusive of design or is poorly targeted can be discriminatory or even offensive. So, for example, campaigns that assume gender based on traditional roles or that ignore the diverse nature of modern relationships could offend or alienate LGBTQ plus individuals. There is also a kind of a risk of harassment and abuse, that personal information that's used in SMS marketing could be accessed by people who could harass or abuse LGBT individuals. Again, this goes back to the whole point of that data needs to be secured at a high level, because a leak of data that relates to sexual orientation or gender identity can have a lot of repercussions, including legal and social risk, outside the US. So in regions where LGBTQ plus rights are not protected, the misuse of data or the leak of data by SMS marketing platforms could lead to legal and social repercussions for individuals who LGBTQ status may be disclosed to these marketing activities. And this is not a small risk. In 69 countries as of last count, it is illegal to either be LGBTQ plus or behave in LGBTQ plus behavior. So in these countries, being outed or being seen could lead to imprisonment, or Uganda and Iran have death penalties for LGBT content. So it's not a small risk for us, which is why I keep kind of hammering the data protection and making sure that you're protecting that at the highest levels, because the results for our community could be really bad.
Yeah, Carlos, thank you for that. I think that we often sort of have talked and sort of focus or have a mindset around the U.S. and U.S. engagement, but I think it's important, for a lot of the brands that we work with, individuals in the U.S. may be thinking about and implementing marketing campaigns that go well beyond our borders, and so being mindful of the cultural context in which you're marketing, I think is a critical takeaway from that. And then I think also you're sort of to balance these competing interests, making sure that you really that you're not guessing at who might want a pride focused kind of marketing message, but finding ways to invite people to volunteer for those types of communications, or otherwise making sure it's broad and general enough that if someone else were to read it, it wouldn't seem like it is targeted to outing it could result in outing that particular person. So balancing those competing interests and again, kind of having that purposeful path to launching these types of activities. Great takeaway from that. And so both Jenn and Carlos, you've talked about the importance of being authentic and inclusive. And we've talked a little bit about how it's important for companies to live those values throughout the year within the company and not just see this as a marketing opportunity and an opportunity for external engagement. So with that in mind, are there particular strategies, advice for leaders on the call today to ensure that their business is more inclusive and accessible to marginalized groups, and not necessarily limited to the LGBTQ community, but are there things that the business as a whole should be thinking about beyond just the marketing? Jenn, do you want to jump in on this one?
Yeah, I think just a really simple starting point is to do some type of exercise internally from a leadership standpoint of why are we doing this? Why are we doing it and why does it matter? Because I find that in the many companies that I've kind of worked with over time, those that have succeeded in kind of a broad implementation that is much more inclusive, and LGBTQ is always just one kind of slice of a much larger conversation. But those that have been more successful have been the ones that have really taken the time to slow down and say, why does this matter to me as a leader? Why might this matter to my employees or my direct reports? And why might this matter to the customers? And the more clear we can have that framing, it really does have this ripple effect across all different communication channels. Because if we can, if you're in a room and the only why someone can think of is, well, because the LGBTQ community has over $1 trillion of buying power. It's like, that's all well and good, sure, but that is absolutely not that is not a why that you are going to then be able to attract and message around. And I think, and we'll share a case study in a little bit too, but I think when we come at it without having a proper why articulated, the minute that there is some type of resistance to that messaging, without that clear foundation and standing, it's so easy to say, you know what, we made a mistake. We're not gonna do this. So you can kind of take that one piece of criticism to Carlos's earlier point. You have two people that criticize and get a bunch of people who love it. You hear that criticism, and when you don't have that strength in that why and the buy-in around you, it is going to be so much easier to say this wasn't worth it. And then you have that kind of reaction from the community, say, oh, wait a minute, this company was like really gung-ho about LGBTQ stuff, and now it just disappeared off the radar. So if we're looking at that continuity year round, Pride is 1 month out of many. And there's many other different LGBTQ awareness days that happen year round. And there's other types of diversity awareness days that are happening year round as well. And so it doesn't have to be, nor should it be, just a June conversation. So I think the more we can just kind of anchor into why is this important, and then be really strategic about how that integration looks from an LGBTQ standpoint into all of the other activities. So if you have employee resource groups, how can you have collaboration among the employee resource groups rather than just having them kind of act in silos that are then not actually supporting and raising one another up?
That's great. I think answering the question why is a critical component to getting to the commitment, right? And then we've talked about that. And so if you don't answer why, it'll be very difficult to follow through on the commitment when there are bumps in the road. And I think it's inevitable if you've been around employee resource groups or different companies over many years, there will be bumps in the road, right? Like you will have times in which you feel like, oh man, we're making a lot of traction. And then there's going to be something that comes along, whether that's an internal discussion, internal conversations, external feedback or pushback that occurs that will be a bump in the road. And if you haven't set the foundational piece of the why we do this, then it's much more difficult to keep with that commitment. So I think that's great overall advice, Jenn, on that, and something that you've definitely talked a lot about in our conversations about like that anchoring that has to happen to be effective long term.
Mhm.
So, Carlos, I'm going to jump to you on this question as well.
Sure. I mean, I think a lot of the points that I've made, I can kind of go through here quickly. One of the bigger things is engaging the community. Obviously involve LGBTQ individuals and organizations in the design process for your campaigns. Listen to their feedback and preferences to make sure that they're being really inclusive. Collaborate with the community can lead to really new innovative ideas and solutions that really resonate with LGBTQ plus users. ERGs are a group for that, but I'm going to go off on a little rant about ERGs now. This is off script, but I think a lot of companies treat ERGs as unpaid consultants on LGBTQ plus issues. And I think that's putting a pressure on ERGs that is not necessarily in line with the mission. So ERGs are certainly important and you should be talking to your ERGs, but they're not a replacement for kind of having independent ideas and thoughts on these issues. To ensure kind of like, a separation of church and state, basically, you're not going to get completely frank feedback from people within the company who may be worried about their jobs or maybe worried about speaking up about a campaign that has been in the works for 8 months. They're all of a sudden, they're like, this is starting to feel wrong. And therefore independent kind of voices are really important. And, also it's just not fair to ERGs to kind of put them in the position of being the arbiter of what an LGBTQ plus policy is for a company. So definitely engage with your ERGs, but don't use them as a replacement for kind of independent voices and feedback from external sources. We talked a little bit, obviously, about privacy and safety, prioritizing privacy settings, reporting mechanisms, and safety features that protect users and data is something that will disproportionately help the LGBTQ plus community. We know from research from data that campaigns that are aimed at our community are often targets of harassment, negative feedback. So kind of having places for people to express their feelings about things they're seeing or reactions that people are having to a campaign is really important. So get kind of a real-time response on how your campaigns are performing with those communities. We talked about inclusive language and representation, obviously inclusive design, making sure that your campaigns do not, go into stereotypical gender roles, that they are diverse and in a authentic way, not just kind of a Benetton ad, kind of like, let's just put one of, a person of every color in here and call it a day. And avoiding
Carlos,
heteronormative.
it sounds like partly too that inclusive design, you should be thinking about that not just purely from your external marketing efforts, but in terms of internally at the company as well, right? Like how you write your policies, how you develop internal resourcing for and training programs and other things within the company. So thinking about that inclusivity is not just a marketing external focus, but it really is a holistic internal company priority as well.
Absolutely. I mean, I don't see how a company can be authentic externally if they're not being authentic internally. So if you're not doing the work to make sure that internally you're addressing these issues, I don't see how you can make a jump to have a campaign that addresses those issues externally. So 100% the internal kind of work is really super important. Like the base of where you should be starting thinking about these issues, because authenticity internally will lead to external authenticity as well.
Right.
So, and then my last point is just measurement and impact assessment. Like, don't just kind of fold up the tent at the end of June and and say let's start talking about this next May. Kind of engage in some thinking and kind of analysis of what went right or how the campaign went or what complaints you got, and incorporate that into your planning for future campaigns. Definitely that feedback after the campaign's over, when you have a little distance from it. I think a lot of us, kind of tend to be like, we're done with pride, let's move on. But it's important to kind of have that, like, that after evaluation to make sure that you captured kind of what went right and what went wrong with your campaign as well.
Excellent. So Jenn, you've talked a few times about, like, if you don't have the commitment, maybe don't go down this path. And I think you mentioned that you have a case study that you were going to share just to kind of illustrate some of the unintended consequences that can happen. So I'll let you jump into that if you don't mind.
Yeah, I feel like there are a lot of case studies of companies doing it well and not doing it so well. And one that I wanted to pull forward was Bud Light. So if for those of us as part of the community, Bud Light has been actively marketing to the LGBTQ community since the 90s, since the mid 90s. And I remember as a 17-year-old in 1998 that should not be consuming alcohol, but I absolutely remember seeing advertisements for Bud Light with like around Pride in June and being rainbowed. And so that was in 1998. I remember going to my first Pride in 2000, and that keychain on the right is selling on eBay right now. Is the first like Pride swag I received, if you will. It was that exact keychain. And so,
do you still have yours, and are you selling it on eBay?
I actually do, and I probably could. I'm not currently selling it, but maybe I will. And what's
she is taking offers.
Yes, the highest bidder by the end of this webinar. So when we look at what happened with Bud Light this year or last year, I wanted to kind of start with like, hey, Bud Light has been actively and not quietly marketing to us since the mid 90s. So if we hop over to 2013, when the Defense of Marriage Act in terms of LGBT marriage occurs, look what Bud Light does, right? So that was, the day the ruling came down was on June 26th, which happens to be my birthday. So I feel like I have a very lucky birthday. And they were very open with their marketing. So, like this imagery is very clear, like, hey, we support everybody. And so if we go even a couple years later to 2016, during the Super Bowl in 2016, Amy Schumer and Seth Rogen did this ad, which I hadn't seen it at the time, but there's a couple of different variations of them. And I believe we're going to include the links in the recap for anyone to go check it out. And they're basically doing, saying like, to hell with politics, we're creating the Bud Light party. And it's pretty entertaining how they're doing it. But at one point in the ad, they say that this party is for everyone, for men, women, and people of all genders. And so this was played during the Super Bowl. So my point being, again, is that Bud Light has been nothing but very vocal in terms of their support for the community. And what happened in 2023, just last year, is that they partnered with an influencer. Her name is Dylan Mulvaney. And I don't know who watching this or even on the replay, if you followed this story at all, but they basically sent her a can with her face on it, which is here on the left of the screen. And she's got millions of followers on TikTok, on Instagram. She's very popular. And she was basically chronicling her journey of womanhood. So I believe the series was 365 Days of Womanhood. And she did a less than 1 minute Instagram video. And part of it, she says, this month I celebrated my day 365 of womanhood, and Bud Light sent me possibly the best gift ever, a can with my face on it. And it is there's truly nothing wrong with how she did this. I mean, it was just, I think, perfect how she did it. And you can see her genuine excitement. She's talking about, because it was a sponsorship around March Madness, and she's basically saying she has no idea what the hubbub is around March Madness, doesn't know what sport it's related to. So kind of just playing up some LGBTQ tropes at the same time. And what happened is that I feel like the masses came for her and for Bud Light. And so if you see some of her follow-up videos, she talks about how this video went viral and there were mass amounts of people from certain political parties who were coming after her and then started boycotting Bud Light. And this is where I think Bud Light made a misstep. And I feel like, there's definitely a lot of articles and kind of debriefs that people have out there, is that they have been actively doing this for decades. And they hired a trans influencer to put side by side with their brand because their former marketing director specifically stated that beer sales in general are on the decline with younger people. And so in their mind, it seemed like, here's a great opportunity. Let's get this young influencer, has a lot of kind of status and reach, and let's put this together. But because there is such a significant backlash happening with trans rights across the country, in the last couple of years, that seemingly only seemed to get worse, what they did wrong was that they didn't back her up. So basically, everyone starts to boycott Bud Light and they go radio silent. So they hire a trans person, put her out there, put her at risk. And then the second everyone comes after her, they're like, not my problem, I'm not involved. And so not only did they lose many customers on the conservative side of things, they also lost decades worth of brand loyalty from LGBTQ consumers by simply not just standing up and backing her up to say, and I don't even know what they would have said, but just something of like, we stand by this decision. But instead, they took all of the heat coming from the conservative side and they're like, we're just going to retreat into the dark and hopefully nobody notices. There's a couple of different articles I was able to find that showed that Bud Light, it had a $3 to $4 billion impact on them as a company. And I don't know what percentage would be conservatives who were boycotting versus LGBTQ people who were like, what is wrong with you, Bud Light? But I feel like this is a really prime example of, you have to be willing to face whatever repercussions might come. And I think in this case, like, there's just so much happening with trans visibility that it absolutely put her in danger. And I think the company could have just avoided this altogether by not even trying. If you're not gonna be able to stand by what you're doing, you don't want to kind of get in there, because hiring somebody and then not stand by them, I feel like is kind of the worst possible decision that they could make. And so I'm sure that there's going to be a lot of LGBTQ people who hold on to this information forever, even though they do have a decades-long track record of doing really well and not backing down.
Yeah, so a lesson that a lot of good work can disappear and goodwill can disappear very quickly if you haven't really thought through the ramifications and that commitment to stand behind it, right?
Mm-hmm.
Carlos, I want to shift gears for a moment. Jenn, thanks for that case study. Carlos, I want to shift gears for a moment and talk again a little bit about some of the work that you've done with LGBT tech. And you've been very active recently in policy discussions about AI. And I think every conference I go to now has an AI track that's sort of the topic in every discussion. But it's certainly impacting in the marketing community as well, having particular impact on brands and those that are listening that are thinking about how to incorporate AI into their workflows or into the tools that they use. Are there particular issues when you think about AI that are unique to the LGBTQ community that those that are building marketing tools or using marketing tools with AI should really take into consideration?
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, you're right. Like, it's become almost a drinking game in policy circles where you take a shot every time someone mentions AI in a completely unrelated conversation. And so, yeah, AI is
If that's the
definitely.
case, you're probably never sober, Carlos. So.
So it works for me. No. That is true. AI is definitely, but in this context, there's definitely an important aspect of it. I think we have been looking at AI for a long time. One of the first areas we got involved in with AI was facial recognition, and just how inaccurate those systems can be, especially for non-binary people, and in terms of gender identity and trans individuals, those systems are horrific. These systems were designed on a binary of male and female. Everyone that was kind of all the data that was put into the system was categorizing people into male or female. So non-binary or or the people who don't subscribe to a male-female gender identity were never considered in the creation of the systems. So there's already kind of built-in bias in the systems, and I think that the biggest concern and the biggest thing that companies need to think about, it is that biased data, biased AI kind of conversation, because there's this fiction that because AI is not controlled by humans, that it's more fair or more accurate. And that could not be farther from the truth. In some ways, AI is more dangerous because it is really hard, if not impossible, to tell what factors led to a specific decision. So, and then it's basically a black box. None of the companies that are working with AI or developing AI want to want to kind of give away, how they come up with their systems, and layer into that AI decision can involve thousands or hundreds of thousands of inputs, and it is really hard to know what specific input led to an outcome. So there's a lot of conversations going on around healthcare and housing because more people are using these systems. Within this context, however, there's a lot of data that's evaluated by algorithms in campaigns. If you're using AI systems to create campaigns, if you're using AI systems to create scripts, you have to be really aware of whether an intentional discrimination is occurring in the ad delivery, and if the training sets for algorithms are systematically biased, then the outcome is going to be biased. And I'll give you a few examples of where this has come up and why this is important for our community. There was an artist who, when this all started, went to Midjourney, which is one of the AI tools, chat bots, and he just put in there 100 gay couples. That was his prompt. He wanted a picture of 100 gay couples. I believe probably 98 of them were young, attractive, thin white men that they all looked the same. It was like this generic white young. And the systems are pulling from the internet, and that is actually like one of the problems with the community. That you do tend to see a lot of these attractive young males representing LGBTQ individuals. So the system, when asked to do 100 gay couples, brought in 98 couples that look like a young white male. The system doesn't know any better. Like, this is representative. Another place where we talk about this is in content moderation or in response. So if you're using algorithms to kind of track response, thumbs up, thumbs down, I like this campaign, I hate this campaign. One of the things that research has proven over and over again is that LGBTQ plus content is treated differently than other content, and will be voted down or will be reported at a higher rate than exactly the same or exactly equal heterosexual content. So a picture of a man and a woman kissing will not bring up any issues, but a picture of two men kissing, the exact same picture, just change the gender, will bring a torrent of down votes and complaints. So that also trains AI systems that LGBTQ plus relationships or content are inherently less than other relationships, because the response that they're getting is like, oh, wait, this content that we're putting out of two men kissing is content that people do not like and people really are against. So these systems are being trained with the feedback loop about the fact that LGBT content is not great. There's another study that shows that automated content moderation labeled drag queen Twitter accounts to have a higher level of toxicity than white nationalists. So the AI system determined that drag queens were more toxic than white nationalists based on feedback. And then there's been stories about YouTube suppressing content, LGBTQ plus content based on votes. There's been stories about TikTok having shadow bans in different countries on LGBTQ plus content. All of these is algorithm driven. So when you are making these campaigns, or if you're using AI in your algorithms and advertising, it's really important to kind of dig into what data sources are being used and whether these data sources are neutral or whether they are biased.
So, super interesting to me, Carlos. I think that a couple of the things that you touched on, right, which is the systems are built in a way that when you're using it for image creation, for example, that it's very unlikely to result in a diverse image if you're not purposeful in prompting it in such a way to ask for that. And I shared with you, I think during one of our prep calls, that I even tried to prompt Dolly to do a diverse image, and it still kept shooting back the same kind of twinkie gay stereotype person within the images that it creates, even when you try to get it to not do that. And so for those that are thinking about using AI in marketing, partly it seems like there will be a learning curve around the prompting, around thinking about giving inclusive prompts, and then seeing if the system actually listens and responds to that. And if not, then you need to consider whether that's really a tool that's going to be something that you want to use in the long term in terms of thinking about how you have authentic and inclusive design. So I think that's a really interesting area. It's certainly one that I don't think many people are talking about. I know you at LGBT Tech are doing research around this issue and continuing to follow the trends, but it's one that when you think about the underlying data sources and where the data is coming from, you kind of see how we get to results that are less likely to be truly diverse and inclusive. So thank you for that. Before I check in to see if we have any audience questions here. Let me just ask each of you quickly if there's one resource that you would recommend our audience take into consideration, review, or read that might help them think about these topics more fully. What would that resource be? And I'll start with Jenn's book so that that one is taken, but I'll leave it up to you to offer some other ones.
You know, the first thing that I think of is the Human Rights Campaign. I know that over the years they've gotten some kind of slack here and there from different constituents within the LGBTQ space, but on the whole, I feel like their corporate equality index can really be such a guidepost for companies. You don't have to be a Fortune 100 to take advantage of it, but just to kind of really look at, if I were to embark on the external marketing side of things, and I want to make sure that my internal house is in order, what are those things that I want to be thinking about? What are those policies, as Carlos has been talking about from an inclusive design standpoint? What does that all look like? And the Corporate Equality Index has just a beautiful, beautiful measurement system to kind of show very quickly where you are doing well and where you have a lot of work to do. And in addition to that, I remember, because I started this work almost 2 decades ago, I remember it being very contained to just the CEI, just the Corporate Equality Index. But if you go to the website now, it is so incredibly robust with sample policies, sample guidelines, step-by-step how to approach certain situations and certain scenarios. So, and it's all just readily accessible on their website. So I cannot endorse just really kind of leveraging the HRC's work as much as you can.
Great, thank you.
For me, obviously, LGBTtech.org is a great place to start looking at these issues. We have many blogs on these issues as well. There's a lot of civil society out there that's doing this work. Please tune into Sources of Society. Thank you. Yes. But if we want to talk about examples, I'm going to talk a little bit in the inclusive design side, as I've been talking about that. Wix, the website builder, they encourage the use of diverse imagery, gender neutral language, and LGBTQ friendly security practices. I would be amiss to not also mention Shopify as one of the places. They have developed a diverse illustration guide that ensures that their imagery reflects real-world diversity and avoids cliches like altering skin colors in unrealistic ways. They focus on understanding the diverse experiences of the merchants. So there's a lot of tools out there, but there's a lot of places where you can go to get this work done.
Great. Thank you for that. So let me turn to a couple of audience questions in the last few minutes that we have, and then we will wrap up here shortly. So for both of you, thinking about what we've discussed today and what you know from your long history now working on these issues, what's one piece of advice you might share either with your younger professional self or one of our audience members that's sort of newer to the professional community and just starting to think about these issues and how to have impact?
I can jump in and just say, I think that my high level tip would just be to just be yourself, because I think so often as LGBTQ individuals, we are covering some aspect of our identity in some form or fashion, especially in workplaces. And I remember when that job that I was telling you about, I remember when I started that job, I was in the closet, and it was the first time I was like kind of professionally in the closet, because I was working in retail before, where everyone was kind of openly doing whatever they pleased and no one really cared. Whereas this very small, catty corporate environment was had just a toxic feel to it. So I feel like if I had to go back in time, just be like, yeah, this does not represent reality. Just be yourself and you will find your people.
Great. Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, I think very similar to what Jenn said. I think that if I look back, I would have spoken up more. I think that a lot of people are hesitant to dive into decisions if they're not part of the community. I remember complaining to friends. I used to work at Discovery, and before marriage was legal, they would gross up our paycheck to include insurance for partners, because you couldn't do that legally. But the taxes on that were not considered, so you ended up paying all these extra taxes because you were having this income, and we would grumble about it. And then after about a year and a half, I actually talked to somebody in HR and said, by the way, this is an issue that we've been kind of thinking about. And they're like, oh, we'll absolutely fix that immediately. And I'm like, I should have just said something. So if you're in a space where you feel safe to be out, and if you feel safe and you have the power to be a spokesperson for these issues, I think you definitely should take that on earlier, because I think people are willing and want to do the right thing in corporations. They just don't know what that is. So there are a lot of things that we see as individuals that we may not agree with, or that if we just voiced it, it would make a difference. So if you're in a place where you can do that, I personally would give my younger self the advice to just speak up more and be more vocal about decisions. People will actually appreciate it and not feel like you're a pain in the ass, which is what I had in my mind.
Great. So I want to thank you both for spending time with us today. It's been a really great discussion. Really proud that we could pull this together as part of the work of Postscript Pride, share it with our both internal and external community. Thank you, Jenn, as well, for making copies of your book available. We will put up a slide now to show people how the link for that, as well as include a live link in the program in order for people to be able to download copies of the book. So thank you very much for that. And we've already shown a slide, but just as a reminder, great opportunity to sign up for LGBT Tech and their newsletter that they make available. I get regular updates from them about policy issues, the latest and greatest conversations and events that are happening as well. So really, if you're interested in particular in the privacy issues and other things that are impacting the LGBTQ community, it's a great resource that they provide there. I also want to take a personal moment and highlight a nonprofit that Postscript is working with in this space. It's a nonprofit called Out is the New In, based here in Phoenix, which is where Postscript has many of its employees and founders. Out is the New In works in the Phoenix and Scottsdale communities to raise awareness about mental health issues, as well as to support other LGBT service organizations. It was actually founded by a police officer in Scottsdale as he retired, and his son, to help really get back to the community. I myself previously worked with police officers and firefighters across the country as amicus counsel in the marriage equality cases. So kind of like this intersection. And even more critically, they are a Shopify store. So they actually have merchandise. If you're looking for merchandise for your colleagues and others for Pride, you might check out their website and the great merchandise that they have available, which they sell in order to provide support to LGBT other nonprofits within the Phoenix area. So again, thank you to everyone for joining us today. It's been a great pleasure. As I mentioned, there is a recording, so we'll be sending follow-up emails to everyone that registered. And thank you so much for your time. Have a great rest of your Wednesday. Take care.
Thank you.